Hello, everyone. Today, Brecht Billiet is together with me, and we are going to speak and code a little bit of Angular Query. Hi, Brecht.
Hi, Thomas. I'm really excited to be here, and I'm really excited to learn about Angular Query. So let's dive
Yeah.
in.
My idea for today is that we would generate a new Angular application, and we could, code a little bit and see what we've got here. So let's make it Angular Query, a new application, Angular Query app, and we would do all the installing, all the stuff that we need to get up and running. I've got the newest Angular 17.2. So yeah, in the meantime, we can chat a little bit about Angular Query. Brecht, what do you know about Angular Query?
Let's pretend I don't know anything about Angular Query. So tell me what's it all about?
All right, so well, I like to start discussing tech with the question why. So why would you even use something? So Angular Query, like in very, very short words, is a perfect tool when it comes to synchronizing the state of your server to your local client, so that when you have lots of, RESTful resources that you need to fetch with HTTP GET that you might change with HTTP POST, put, delete, patch, etc., etc., that basically you want to put as little effort as you want, as little effort as you need, so that you've got the data that you need to either, display, process on your client side, whatever. So that's basically the main idea behind the tool.
Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
So,
So
yeah.
yeah, maybe I want to point out a few problems that I'm always having or
Hmm.
always keep returning when I'm working for new clients. I've been in over 150 Angular projects, and always the same things are coming back. Like we have error handling, we have success state, we have loading state. Sometimes we have multiple pieces of data being loaded, and then where do we want to show a spinner, stuff like that. So would it also help with that?
When it comes to displaying the spinner or displaying an error message, etc., like that's kind of the view layer. But generally, um, what Angular Query is doing, and generally Angular Query is part of the, maybe you know it, maybe not, the Tanstack family of, many different framework-related libraries. They all work the same way. So your component will basically have a dependency, like you can think of it as a dependency of some external data. And this is what we call a query. So if your component has a query, then it will manage all the loading, error, fetching, refetching, validating, invalidating, etc. for this certain query. So whenever your components depends on a query, you are already granted whether this is loading, whether this is an error, or whether it's fetching, refetching, etc. So all you need to do, like you need to define the query itself. And for this reason, you can use RxJS, you can use promises, async await, whatever fits you. And you just consume. If it's loading, like this is what you get from the inject query thing. If it's loading, then you just display a loader. If it's an error, then you display the error message. If you've got the data, then you just display it. It could be that we're going to get to that later. There could be a situation in which you already have loaded the data, but you want to refresh it. So you would display, let's say, a listing or a table of the data, but since you are refreshing, you would also like to show the loader, the spinner at the same time. So basically, you need to rely on certain properties that are returned from the query, but they're already sent to you. So
Yeah,
I would say, apart from the HTML thing, yeah, I think you can consider that they're handled for you.
sounds very interesting. So
Yeah.
let's continue.
Yeah, so we need to install a little bit of packages. So since, as I mentioned, that comes from Angular, sorry, from Tanstack family of packages, we need to install tanstack/angular query. And right now, what we are working with, experimental, this is still an experimental phase, though in a couple of weeks, we expect that it will walk out of experimental. Like, this seems to be stable, what we've got. Just a little bit of things are still kind of, we want them to make it, fully featured, everything, so that there would be no breaking changes. So we're still considering it experimental, just for the sake of introducing no breaking changes later. So there are two packages, Angular Query itself and Angular Query Devtools. The Devtools are going to display us what are the current queries, what are their states. Also, they will allow us to change a little bit of things within the queries, for instance, refetch them or invalidate them, destroy them, and so on and so forth. So maybe let's just start our app. So that would be npm start here. I need to walk into the directory npm start. Yeah, let's use a different port.
Didn't you install it at level too high?
Perfect. We've got our clean Angular application up and running. So what we need to do at the very beginning, of course, there is a little bit of setup that we need to do. So I have already opened the app config file over here. So we've got the providers, and we would need to provide Angular query as is. Oh, by the way, I can see that VS Code doesn't suggest me the stuff, so let's put it Angular, sorry, Tanstack. Tanstack Angular query experimental, yes, that's it, and provide Angular query, that's it. So what is basically this provide Angular query doing over here? So there is going to be one thing that is called...
You're not within the square brackets.
Right. Sure. I'm not here. Right. So what Angular query is doing here, like we need to provide the new query client over here. So what is this query client thing? So for the entire application, we're just gonna have one thing that we're going to use here, query client, right? This is going to be, let's say, a manager object that will basically manage all the queries. The query client is going to manage the cache, the invalidation, all the stuff that is going on there. And we're going to provide it at the root injector of an Angular application. So we just do it once, and that's basically it. If you need to provide any kind of, override any defaults, then you've got some default options, query cache, mutation cache, etc., etc. So there is quite a bit of stuff that we might be interested in, overriding some defaults, but let's not walk into it at this point. This is something that you do just once for your entire application, and that's basically it. So whenever any of your components would be accessing a query, this is actually what you'll be like working with, though you don't need to know about that at all. So this is just a one-time configuration.
Is it safe to say that the query client and all the queries that are being registered to that is like a singleton for the entire application, or
yes,
can it be like lazy loaded and stuff like that?
Yeah, I would say it's safe to say that this is a singleton. Like, of course,
Right.
you could make it lazy, though I don't think, like, unless you have a very big application that has pretty specific requirements and so on and so forth, I would say it would be okay to make it a singleton because, like, for instance, like in Redux architecture, you're going to have one store. And in this case, you're going to have basically one query client for the entire application, and this is going to be fine. Like
Makes sense.
you can have lots of different queries put in many different different places in your application, though one query client is just enough. And in most situations, putting multiple query clients would just complicate things. Though, if you really need such situation, of course, you can make that lazy loaded. Though the thing is, the whole point of using React Angular query is that you want to load your data with the minimal amount of code and refetch, refresh, invalidate, etc. with minimal amount of code. So most probably you're going to make use of query client as soon as possible. So on the very first page that you're using.
Cool.
But maybe there would be a use case that you would like to, defer loading Angular query at all. Maybe there would be such use case. Okay, so let's walk into the app component TS file. So for the sake of simplicity and displaying, all the code within one page, I'm just going to get rid of the styles because, well, like this is not about CSS, and I'm just going to put all the templates over here. So let it be h1 hello Angular query, and let's close that one. So we've got hello Angular query. Everything seems to be correct at this point. There is one more thing that I think we would need, and that is, oh, by the way, maybe I'll just open the native Devtools so that we've got them at the bottom over here. Just make them slightly smaller. One thing that we might need would be Angular Query Devtools. So Angular Query Devtools is not going to be a new tab here, but it's just going to be a piece of like HTML displayed here. So Angular Query Devtools is just going to be yet another component. So currently, obviously, this is not recognized. By the way, I've got
You
a
made a
small
typo,
typo
yeah.
here. Yeah. So we need to import it. Let's see if Angular query now. For some reason, VS Code IntelliSense is not having the best
Is
day
this
today.
the time I make a WebStorm comment or
If you want, feel
no,
free.
no. No, I'm a platform fan, but
No, like, I'm not a VS Code, fanboy or fanatic. Yeah. So basically, just only for the reason that you would not want to display the DevTools within your production bundle, which is obvious, only for the sake of this. This is just a separate entry that you just download, and that's basically it. So you provide the thing, and that's it. So there is one thing that you would like to also do is whether it's initially open or not. Like most often, if this is in the development mode, most probably you would like to display it right now. And yeah, it will get displayed in a while. Let's move further. So Angular Query DevTools is already installed. So let's download some data. So my suggestion is that we could actually make use of the Typicode API. I hope you probably know the link. Like you can just open, JSON placeholder Typicode, and there you have, users, posts, like just a standalone API you've got there in the web. Maybe I can just open a new tab over here, Typicode slash users slash posts. So using this stuff, we could basically make use of just an API for free. So we've got a users. We can make a HTTP call for a whole collection, or HTTP call just using an ID, or posts again, or comments. We can also, filter it up, maybe not comments like post ID like this. Yeah, and so on and so forth. So I would just make use of this, this one. So let me just get back to our screen setup. So let's make this one on the right, and let's make this one on the left back again. All right, so this would be our API. So what we would have anyway in Angular, and we don't want to, change that, would be to have a service that basically works with HTTP. So let's generate a service. That would be, we are in the right directory, ng generate service, and let's make it, let's say, authors service. So let's call it, like, what is your convention to name services that do HTTP? If you have an author entity, what would be your preferred name?
Author.
Author.
So it would be
All right.
author.service, but author is with an H after T.
Uh,
Made a typo there.
Age. Right. Authors.
Yeah.
Sure. All right. So let's make it author. Generate a service. Yeah, as you can see, I'm the typo master to some extent.
We are
All
all.
right. So let's make it that we've got the HTTP client over here, inject, and we need the HTTP client to be available. So let's make it HTTP client down injected. Yeah. So of course we could, provide an injection token to put the string somewhere, but I think it's kind of beyond what we're doing today, so let's just forget it for a while. And what we would have here anyway, that would be kind of get all authors, etc. So this is just plain old service that you would have anyway, and we would have return this.http client URL slash maybe not. Oh, I'm wondering whether that was authors or users. Let's stick with users, whatever. That's just a name. So that would be just a method on a service that you would use in your Angular app anyway. So let's now proceed to generating a component that would actually
I think you
display.
forgot something. I think you
Oh, yeah?
still need to import the HTTP client in your app config, right?
Right. That's true. So that would be provide HTTP client. Yeah, thank you. That would probably be troublesome at some point. Sure. Yeah. So we've got the thing. So let's create author listing, whatever we call it, component. So this one will just use the nested component, and let's pick author listing component over here. Fine. And let's again drop the styles and the template. Right. So normally what you would do, that would be basically authors service, whatever your convention is, inject author service. Sorry. So instead of this, like if we carried on using this direction, you'd be responsible for actually subscribing to RxJS, which is maybe not a big deal because you can use either async, pipe, or any other features. But the thing is, you're responsible for checking whether your data is still valid, whether it's fresh. If it's not fresh, you're responsible for refreshing the thing. Also, if this service, like this is a stateless service, so it doesn't hold the state, right?
Mhm.
And if you wanted other components within your application to reuse the same data, then you would need to apply all of that stuff manually. And the whole point is that here we are not going to use basically only the HTTP over here. So there would be a middle layer. So query is going to be a middle layer, which is going to provide us the shared data across the whole application. So whenever there would be a query that depends on this one, on this API/users, this is going to be provided within the query client, and all the components within your entire application have access to this query client. And whenever Angular query finds out that your data is not fresh anymore, so we call it stale, because like you can configure each query, like what is the time of staleness. But when the time comes and the query data is considered stale, it's going to refresh automatically. And the thing is, you don't have to do anything with it. So you just define what is the stale time. For instance, in some applications, stale time would be 0. So immediately the data is considered stale because you need to refresh it whenever you need. And in some other cases, you would define this as 60 seconds. In some different applications, you would consider it 10 minutes, or you could even define it as never becoming stale. But the thing is, you just provide one number. What is the stale time? And that's basically it. So we've got the inject over here, and we would need to provide how does that look like right now. So let's define the query itself. All right, so that would be, let's say, authors query. So what we need to do here is to inject the query. And well, I think I'm going to restart the TS server. I guess this is the thing that basically, yeah, keeps on introducing our issues. So we're injecting the query, and the query is basically going to be a function that returns an object. And we define, first of all, what is the query function over here. So the query function is whenever you consider that you need to refresh your request, you would basically use like the function provided by your service. So in this case, that would be like, and again, whether you want to refresh the function or you want to, because here this method is has no parameters. So some people sometimes do it like all authors, that this is a cold stream anyway. So you don't need to recreate it every time, RxJS stuff. So whatever your convention is, query function would basically recreate the underlying requests. So in our case, we would still be using the author service. So we would need the authors service anyway. Inject author service. Oh, actually, I do have it already. I'll just uncomment that. Let's make it private because we don't want anybody from outside to use it. And that would be this.hash author service get all authors. And now the thing is, currently we don't have direct support for RxJS yet, though also the thing is, a query function requires something to be recreated each time. So we're just going to use a small utility from RxJS, and that is last value from, which basically will do the job for now. So all in all, if you have a stream, you might expect multiple items being emitted from a stream. And what what TanStack query is capable of right now is that it would basically like recreate the function so that you get the response from here. So we are working on making it like slightly more seamless with RxJS so that you don't need to wrap it with this last value from, but actually like whenever you do an HTTP call, just a single HTTP call, like you expect one response anyway, right? So that's a little bit of boilerplate, but apart from that, like I don't think that this is anyhow troublesome. So am I missing anything?
So you said like there's no RxJS support. Like let's say that you have some kind of search fields and you want to do like a switch map. Like, is that possible? Because like the switch map always unsubscribes from the previous ones, which will do an XHR abort.
Yeah. So well, maybe it's not true to say that there is no RxJS support. So there is no perfect RxJS support yet. So by this perfect, I mean that you have to directly map from RxJS to a promise, because last value from is just going to return a promise. So this is what I mean that we don't have like perfect support for it yet, but all the cancellation, aborts, etc., all this is going to be supported here. By the way, this is RxJS, and this is what actually does the cancels. So, and
Yeah.
of course, Tanstack query is doing the cancellation of the query function underneath anyway. So,
Okay.
but if you had a switch map, the thing is, let's say that you are searching for people with names starting with B. Then you type R. So you are searching for people with BR name and then BRE. You know where I'm going to. And you would need to cancel the first query, the first request, so that the second request is the one that you're interested in. Then you need to cancel the second request so that the third one is the one that you care about, etc., etc. So this is what you would do manually in RxJS, and that's perfectly fine. What you would do in Tanstack query is slightly different, because what you have right here is that you have something that is called a query key, and you would kind of manage the query key on your own. So a query key could be just a string, but it could be like, in most cases, that would be an array of certain, let's say, certain keys, certain strings. So what you care about is the authors. And now imagine this is your global unique identifier of a data resource within our application. So when you search for, like when you query for all authors, like how many ways do you have to query all authors? I would say one, right? Like how many times can you, yeah, like how many different ways? But if you had multiple different methods, so let it be get author by ID, and let's make it that there will be an author ID, let it be a number, whatever, and we would have users slash author ID. Then you would have a different query that would be not author's query, but author query or author by ID query, whatever. And here we would need to provide what is the author by ID. And let's just put, I know, author ID equals signal, and let it be just one. And here we would put author ID over here. So there is a tiny bit of reactivity here, so that if our query depends on the author ID, then you would need to include it here. So that would be not the whole list. By the way, you could define it that this is a whole list of authors. And here you would need that this is authors. So you walk into, like, deeper into the hierarchy. So you don't need a list, you need details. And whose details do you need? Well, the author IDs. And now, instead of doing a switch map, whatever you do is that whenever author ID changes, all of that thing basically automatically updates, because you would have a completely, totally different query key provided. So you would have one query key for author ID 1, you would have a different query key for author ID 2, etc. So in your query client, you would have both the list, the details of ID 1, and the details of ID 2. Like, some of them could be, fetched already, some of them could be canceled, some of them could be active, passive, inactive, and so on and so forth. But the thing is, instead of doing that on the switch map level, because whenever you do something on RxJS level, like, this is concurrent, this is like async safe, and so you handle race conditions and so on and so forth, RxJS is powerful. But the thing is, if you do it outside of the query client, well, like Angular query could not support that. So all in all, Angular query is meant more or less to manage all the HTTP gets that you need to, which responses you need to use somehow in your application. And whenever you need to switch from something, basically change the key that you've got here. So this is not only reactive, but also like all the data that you have loaded already, they're going to live over here. So for instance, you started with with author ID 1, and you loaded the data. Then you change the signal to B2, you display the data. But when you change back to query 1, the thing is, does query client hold the old data? Yes. So would you do a request? That depends. If your data is not stale yet, yeah, like you consider it fresh, then you don't redo the request, because why? If it's fresh, you don't need to redo that request. And imagine this is where the convenience comes in. Like, you just provide where do you get the data, and if you need any, RxJS features here, go with that. But you don't need to manage the data loading and data synchronization for you. That's the whole point. So that yeah, you just define, this is my dependency. And this is all that you need, more or less. By the way, if you wanted to provide the stale time that I mentioned before, stale time is just one of the very, very, very many options that are available. So 1000 because that's in milliseconds, and let's say that we consider author data to be fresh just within 1 minute from the point where you have downloaded the data. Let's say that this would be the thing. Does it make sense, Brecht?
It does.
Yeah. So we can start, I think, displaying the data. So let's make it, I don't know, unordered list. Yeah, like I would need to type a little bit right now. So yeah,
You forgot a
for
slash at the bottom
yeah,
none.
slash, exactly. So when you start thinking about the high level things, you forget the low level details immediately. Okay, so what we've got here is, like, we've got the author query thing. So the way we are going to actually, maybe I'll just remove it for a while. The way we're going to use the author query, the API is, let's say, XYZ. I'm going to remove it in a while. This dot author query. So what we've got here is the data, and what is, in our opinion, like the people who are behind Angular query, um, is it's very convenient to work with signals. So this is defined basically by signals. So the data
Oh,
is
data
basically
is a signal.
exactly. So
Yeah.
so you don't care that you have RxJS underneath, and you don't care that you have a query client. So basically, you define that your component depends on external data, and you have a signal, and that's it. That's basically
Cool.
it. So you have the data, and you asked about the things like whether the data is loading or whether you have an error, etc. So instead of just the data, you would have things like is error, is fetched, is fetching, is loading
That's
error,
really
is
cool.
paused, etc., etc. And that's not that's not all. There is on Tamstack query itself, there is a TypeScript discriminated union, which would verify whether, let's say, if you have an error, you cannot have the data. If you have the data, you cannot have the error, etc.
Yeah.
So, so some impossible states are also removed on that level. There is one thing that is slightly inconvenient, but that falls to the Angular signals being functions themselves, but we'll get to it slightly later. Okay, so we've got a for loop. So we're going to walk through the authors, which is the authors query. And what we need here is basically to make it a signal. Now, what is going on here? For loop must have a track. All right, so track, author, and now we need to, I'm afraid we need to define what is an author. So let's just quickly define that. There is an interface author that would have an ID. That is a number, name, string, email. Probably the response is slightly different, but we will get back to it. All right. So Angular query, here comes the data. What did I do wrong here? Author query.
Sorry to iterate over something, but data is not like an array or something. It's not typed yet. Isn't that the issue?
Oh, that could be. I'm not sure. Let's see whether this should be, that would be the author. Oh, like gods of live coding probably are not today with me. Author array. Ah, yeah, that was it. Like, in TypeScript, sometimes the error that you get is not what is exactly the error. All right. So we've whether we use the routing or not, like I'm going to ignore the routing for just a while. So we've got the author, what we want to display right now. So author is basic, like since this is a signal, this is just the author. So let's display that this is going to be the author name in double braces, of course. Yesterday I was doing a React training, so that's the reason that you sometimes mix up the syntax. All right, so we've got the author listing component. We just need to put the author listing component to be displayed actually here. So let's put the op author listing over here. So here we go, and we need to import
Yeah.
the author listing component here anyway. So that should be it. Okay, and let's see what's going on here. We have a console error. So inject query can only be used within an injection context, such as constructor, factory function, a field initializer, etc., etc. Yeah, so I hope we will be back on track. Angular query, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that was it. Fuck, so it was node modules.
Yeah, it's
Shit.
I also lost like a huge amount of time. Like when I did an npm install on the high level, it just becomes like unreliable or unpredictable.
Exactly. All right.
Look at that.
Yeah, so
Life is good again.
So we're back after a quick break where it turned out that I accidentally installed npm packages in the wrong directory anyway. So after this, we are back on port 4200. What we've got here is the query from the author's query. So this is the author's query list. And this is also what we see in the, this is the network tab that we wanted to see. So this is the native Devtools. This is the Angular query Devtools. By the way, the reason that Angular query Devtools didn't appear before, and they should appear because they were just included in this line over here, that was also caused by the npm package installed in the wrong directory, which, like, well, in theory, it should work anyway, but it didn't. Anyway, dear everybody, what we can see is author details one and authors list. So we basically can see all the queries that we have in our application. So I think this is the most important part of the whole app, I would say. So if we just refresh our application here, as you can see, there is something that is saying fresh, and the other one is slightly kind of yellow gold-ish, and that is called stale. So all of these queries have their very specific states. So it could be fresh, fetching, paused, stale, inactive, etc. And why do we consider author's query to be stale? Because the default is that whenever you fetch some data, theoretically, it could already have changed. So we should consider the data as stale. But since we have configured that the stale time is here, defined as 60 seconds, then after I end up talking and 60 seconds will pass, this query will become stale. By the way, we could, configure this thing like that so that they will become fresh for 60 seconds, or we could just make the author's query list to be fresh for 5 seconds, just not to wait that long. And the whole point is, dear everybody, and dear Brecht, is that by the way, authors lists have already made stale. If you display the data like we're displaying it right now, Angular query could refetch it in the background. It's not doing it by default, but if you, let's say, walked into a different page so that your component, which was depending on the query, would get destroyed so that the whole query would get cleaned up, etc. But the query within the query client didn't get destroyed. And when you go back, we get what is called SWR. So that is stale while revalidate. And that's an approach in programming where you might have a resource fetched on your side, and even if it's stale, do display it, but revalidate in the background. So basically that's having the best of both worlds. So we don't want the user to have nothing. So we will display the stale data, but at the same time, we are automatically, like you don't need to do anything with that. We're going to reload the data and like show the spinner, of course. So that's basically the thing. So this is SWR, and that's the whole point of Angular query. So what we can do right now is to show that there is going to be a spinner. So if, what's the name? Author query, for instance, is loading or is fetching dot is loading, for instance. And if it's loading, then yeah, display div loading. So like we can also introduce some network throttling just to make it fast 3G. Let's see if it changes the situation significantly. Yeah, the loading has just popped up here. So if we, for instance, destroy the list one, we can basically, by the way, we can make it refetch. We can invalidate it, we can reset it, we can trigger loading, as you can see over here. We can also trigger error that we are not we are not making use of it here yet, but of course we could. So if author's query is loading, also if author's query error, for instance, there would be an error over here. Whatever. So yeah, authors list, and let's make it, by the way, when I clicking refetching over here, list refetching, then you can probably see the shift from here, from fresh 2 fetching 0 into fresh 1 and fetching 1. So let's make it refetch again and concentrate here that, yeah, this response is getting too fast. So let's make the throttling even harder to slow 3G. And let's make the refetch back again. So depending on what the speed is, this is still everybody getting refetched. Now, what we could also do would be to remove a certain entry. Now, whenever we do anything within this component, Angular query will kick in and will basically, like any kind of chain detection whatsoever, it will get back to display what the data is here. By the way, let's actually make sure that the data that we display here actually makes sense. So let's walk into the network tab back again, and let's see. Oh, by the way, we've got the slow 3G connection, so let's speed it up a little bit. So we've got the users preview. So we've got ID, name, sounds okay, and username and email. Oh, that was almost correct. Yeah, so we've got those data over here. Yeah, and by the way, you can see that this one is already triggered. So I think we could play with a signal just to display that whenever we, change the signal value, that the details of this thing are going to update. So I'll just toggle the 10-stack query Devtools over here. So let's say that the current signal, so current author ID is basically the author ID, right? And that would be button inc. That would basically increase the button. That would be another button to decrease the ID. And yeah, like author ID set. And here we go with a
Can you use update? I can just increment it.
yeah, whatever. Value +1. I'm not sure if this one is going to be correct within Angular template syntax. I'm afraid. Like, I'm not sure if you can do this
Yeah, you
within the
should, but
template.
you expose the author ID as a signal to the template.
Yeah, but the thing is, it's getting a parser error. This is the unexpected token. That's the issue. But yeah, I can quickly make an inc method. No worries with that. Author ID, almost. No. So Copilot is not yet aware of how to deal with Angular signals at this point. So dec and make it -1. And here, let's just make it inc. And here, let's just make it dec. And this is already what we need, right? So we've got the author details one. When we increment the stuff, as you can see immediately, two things happen. First, this one becomes inactive. Why? Because Angular query knows that no component requires it from now on. Nobody cares about the thing. So it is there, but it's totally inactive. So does it make sense for us to refresh the data for an inactive query? No. That's basically it. By the way, imagine how many things you don't need to care on your side. Right? This is where the power comes in. And
Nice.
so we've, yeah,
That's really
I can
nice. And
see.
I really like the fact that I thought like the author ID, the signal, you just read it in the query key. So I thought like it's just a function, but like Angular query keeps like a reference to it, keeps on listening to it when it changes, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, cool.
And of course, in a real application, we would have not just one and one. We would have like, I don't know, three different components actively depending on a query or no component and so on and so forth. Something that I haven't mentioned is there is stale time, which basically declares for how long is a query considered stale. A stale means I am going to display it to you, but on the first chance, I could refresh it in this stay while revalidate manner. I will refresh it. But there is also another thing, and that is, if I remember that correctly, that should be cache time, I believe, or there is a different name that potentially I forgot or that was changed in the API, like from the version 3, version 4, version 5 currently, and that is the time after the query should be totally removed. So the stale time is basically, we consider it unfresh, but still kind of usable. But if it's so old that it's better to remove it entirely, then there is another key that I would need to remind myself what the name of that was. Maybe if I do time, GC time, probably. That's probably, it used to be cache time. Now it's garbage collection time one. So yeah, so in this case, after 2 minutes, something should get removed entirely, totally. So yeah, that's the thing. So I think it would be useful to provide one more thing because we have spoken only about queries, but the data could get outdated if our external data changes. So for instance, we've got the list of all the authors. So the current author that we're displaying here is ID for, so that would be probably Patricia Lebzak, whatever. By the way, we could also display that there is the current author is, and let's just display who the current author is. So that would be author query. Author query dot data. Yep. So let it be this way. So this is linear Graham, and that's basically the thing. And what should happen if we, let's say, click a delete on one of them? So in other words, if we have a, let's say, delete button over here, and that would be delete author name button delete somewhere around here. Button, what it was suggesting was okay. And let's put the delete with the ID. So that would be ID and author. We can export the interface over here to make it accessible. Author.id. And here we would need to put a delete author a query as well. Author ID, that's the author ID. Exactly. Oh, I love Copilot for this. I really love it because I know what I want to achieve, and I don't need to, from high level, I don't need to switch to the low level and, lose my focus.
Cool.
I absolutely love it. Yeah, so this is the delete. So we're using this JSON placeholder typicode API, and the issue is that we will do a delete, though this specific API, just because many other people are using it for kind of tutorials, etc. This is not going to reflect our delete. So we're going to see the delete over here, though it will not get removed. So I'm just highlighting the thing. So even though we will click a delete, the same data set will appear, but this is only because of this API. I could use a different API the next time. Anyway, we've got the delete ID here. Of course, we would need to put the author.id over here. So that's basically nothing interesting going here. And the thing is, this is our list. And this list is included within that query. And the issue is that if I delete, let's say, Lee and Graham, and like currently I'm not doing anything here. But the thing is, there is a kind of correlation between me deleting the thing over here and this query becoming stale, because the data contained within current cache of that query would be like out of date, right? So the thing is, if I'm performing an action like a delete, post, put, patch, etc., potentially some of the queries should get kind of invalidated, right? Does it make sense?
Yeah, sure.
So this is where mutations kick in. So we have inject query, but we have also inject mutation. So a mutation is basically a concept that if you have a query and you change some data related to the query that it could invalidate it, you basically attach a mutation. So what we're going to do with that mutation is whenever a mutation kicks in, we should automatically invalidate this query. That's basically it. So that inject query is declarative, and whenever a mutation kicks in, automatically our query gets invalidated. So let's basically do the thing. So we have inject query over here, and we will have a inject mutation that will be, we're going to delete author. So that would be delete author mutation. Like we can call it mutation. We don't have to call it a mutation, whatever. So our inject mutation is again going to be a function that will return an object. By the way, why does it return an object? Because if we want this to be reactive, we cannot just create it once. We potentially have to recreate it on every, chain detection cycle. So this is the reason that it's not just the object, but it's just a function that returns the object. And that's basically it. So inject query would have a mutation function, and the mutation function is basically going to be what? For an ID of an author, now let's remove this one. We're going to get the delete author on our author service. So that would need to be the last value from this author service, delete author ID. Exactly. And one thing that we are still missing over here, maybe I'll just move it like this. One thing that we're missing is that like this mutation is, as for now, this is somehow useless since it's not attached to anything. So the way we can attach it to something is that once this mutation succeeds, we would need to attach it to this query. So this is useless unless we actually do what happens on success. And as you can see, there is on error, on mutate, on settled, on success, etc., etc., etc. So on success is basically going to be a callback function that we would say, we want to invalidate query. How do we identify queries? By IDs. So that's the thing. Now, if we delete Leanne Graham, which is author ID 1, which queries in our case should we invalidate?
Both.
Both. So
The
that would
list.
be author list and everything that relates to author details 1. So this is how we declare things. And imagine how many things you would have to do on your own without that. So this is like you're thinking about queries of dependencies and what are the relations between them. And you just delegate the responsibility down to Angular query. So what we get here is we would need to invalidate both keys, right? So the way we invalidate both keys, we don't do it via inject query. We do it via what we've had before, via query client. So if we want to get query client, this is one of the things that, this is the only thing that we are going to inject here as well. So this is going to be query client. Like apart from this one, you will never need anything more. So there is query cache, but you don't inject it. There is mutation cache, you don't inject it. This is the only thing that you will need. So query client is the, let's say, global manager for all the queries within your application. So what we're going to have over here is that we would basically, it knows the shit already. So this query client invalidate queries, and instead of passing it this way, we would need to say that, hey, the query key is going to be, for instance, authors list, because this is what we have right now. But that could be also, what is the here?
Also need the
filters.
ID, no?
This is the ID.
No, I
You
mean
mean
like the ID of the author.
yeah, sure. Details, and that would be the ID. Yep. Because we've got the ID on success data object, so that would be the context object. The context object is let me see. Data variables. Okay. So I would need to remind myself how to get the data from here. Mutation ID, but currently, like for now, we can just use it from here. I know it might be not the perfect way to do it, but there needs to be a way to retrieve the data from here, though. I just forgot how to do it. So this is one way. I'll just move it right here. This is one way to do it. If you wanted to, for some reason, invalidate a whole list of the things. Oh, we have some console error like here. Oh, query client error, no provider for query client. So let me see whether we are missing something. That would be a query client. That has something to do with dependency injection. So we've got the query client not available for this component. Let me check. Inject query client. All right. So instead of inject query client, that should be basically a function that says inject query client. And apart from this one, that should be it. What was the reason for this specific error was that the query client is just a POJO class. is just a JavaScript class which is not injectable.
Mhm.
That's basically it. So now it's just wrapped with use class, Angular stuff, and so on and so forth. So yeah, we could invalidate it this way. The other way, which is also very, very useful and very neat, is that instead of invalidate queries twice, this is something that people do very, very often. And that is basically invalidate all the query keys which start with this. So basically, like potentially invalidate, for instance, all the lists. Maybe not exact. Oh, by the way, you've got this exact true if you want like only to invalidate this one, but you can, for instance, invalidate everything that relates to the author, everything that relates to the list, etc. So query keys are hierarchical. So let's just
So
see how it works. Yep.
does it work the other way around as well? Like I thought I read it in your blog article that you could do like we have authors, and then instead of having list and details, we have authors and author ID. And then when you invalidate authors.author ID, then it also automatically invalidates authors. Is that true?
Yeah, exactly. So here, like you have authors and author list. Try to consider list as a subkey of authors so that it's not a list, it's a hierarchy. So that list is a, let's say, subkey of authors, details is a subkey of authors, and this one or two, etc., is a subkey of details, etc., etc., etc. So when you do authors, you're just doing pattern matching.
Yeah, but what
That
I mean
everybody,
by,
yep.
yeah, sorry, at line 55 after authors, if you add list, for instance, then so this is the new key, like list and then details. So they have lists, and then the next one is details,
Mm-hmm.
and then
You
you
mean here
remove that.
details?
Yeah,
You mean
details
here
and then
details?
the ID. And then after that, the ID, author ID, like that. And then when you invalidate authors list details, author ID, when you invalidate that, that automatically the list is being invalidated as well. Or is that not the case?
So what should I write here in 66? Authors and then
Um,
list.
list details, author ID. So when you add like that completely, that in this case
Yeah,
it
so
also goes back because like the keys are hierarchical, so that it will remove author ID, details, lists, and authors, or is that not the case?
no, so it will try to pattern match only the one that has the first item being authors, the second piece being list, the second detail, the third details, and the fourth the ID. And potentially, maybe you have longer keys that have the fifth element, the sixth element, and so on and so forth. So you're just trying to do a pattern match depending on all the elements that you've got here. So the good practice is that actually you're trying to, like, most of the times either you have a list or a details. So most of the times you would have the first element saying what is the entity that you're dealing with,
Mm-hmm.
type of the query being a list or details, so that
Mm-hmm.
like if you don't provide, for instance, some people could go like this, that you have authors and like this being implicitly a list and this being details also implicitly. And then there is a problem that if you want to invalidate a whole group of queries, um, when you're less explicit, like you could accidentally invalidate too much.
Mm-hmm.
That's basically the thing. So it's a good practice to basically be more explicit about the keys that you've got, but
That makes
anyway,
sense.
attach the adapt your hierarchy of keys that you want. Also, something that is kind of a good practice to do anyway is that if we take a look at our what was the name, author service that we've got here. Like I know it should be a different file, etc., etc. Though you're going to use such author's query potentially in many files. Because if it was just used within this file, you would not benefit from using Angular query that much if it's just a single file, right? So the more components actually need the data, the more you're going to benefit from it. And one thing that you don't want to have is to have hard codes of the keys everywhere. So what people advise to do is actually to create an export const. Like you can make it a class, you can make it a function, you can make it an object, whatever you prefer, and that would be author query keys, just to create one place that you actually want to provide your keys. So, for instance, all authors, that would be just the list of everything. So this is all authors keys whatsoever. Now, all authors list, that would be basically just a list, exactly, and all author details. So no, all author details. That would be just author details. That could be basic author list, author details. Now, this is something that would rely on the ID itself. So that would be author details, and here comes the ID. So you just define one place to provide all the keys. So we could just replace it with query key, author keys. Of course, you could provide it via dependency injection and so on and so forth if you consider that is important. Like, I'm not sure if that would be useful because, like, even in tests, you would never need to change it anyhow, because why would you need to change the key names? But still, that would be all authors, author query keys. Why doesn't it?
No, I haven't imported it yet.
Again, restart TypeScript. Exactly. All authors. Ah, damn you. Author list, author service. Did I export it? Yes, so that's basically it. Yeah, so here we've got the query key. So on this part, you just, whenever you provide, like, well, this file is not the best one to provide the query key dictionary, though, yeah, it's somehow connected to the service anyway, whatever. But as long as,
right?
yeah, exactly. That's just a reference. So if you just provide the keys once, then you can be sure that that you depend, like, you're using what you need, but you are not kind of reluctant to or vulnerable to, you know, messing up with the keys
It's way
itself.
cleaner.
It's way cleaner. And now we can basically take a look at what is going on here. So we've got the details 3, and now I'm going to delete the 3. So yeah, let's take a look what will happen right now. So I'm going to delete oh, I haven't attached it. Ha! I haven't run the query. So this is why nothing happens. So if we've got the mutation, what we still need to do is we've got the delete author mutation, this dot delete author mutation, and here we run mutate with ID. So this is just kind of declaration that is, well, lazy, like it's not run. So just invoke it, and this will basically make it run. So again, let's invoke the Clementine Bauch, whatever. So we could see that delete has happened here. And now we are not only reloading the users, but we are also reloading the author ID 3. And now just let me remind that the Clementine Bauch should not appear here, but only because of this API, it just ignores deletes. So this is the only reason why we're getting the same data. But as you could see, this one got revalidated.
That's nice.
So that's the
Can you
thing.
maybe zoom in on line 65 and show like the right side? Yeah, so
The right side, yeah.
maybe it's interesting for the people at home watching that that we show how we get to the idea, because the author idea is, yeah, one, and the one we're deleting is the one that we're passing in the delete function. So how can we get access to that? Because now it's going to invalidate the wrong author, right? So because this author ID is signal 1, but if we click on Clementine, for instance, it's going to be probably ID 3 that we pass at line 50. So how do we get access to that there?
Okay, so if we increment right now, so we've got Clementine Boch ID3. So the thing is, whenever you click, your signal is going to be immediately kind of synchronized with
Yeah,
whatever you did. So
yeah, I totally get that. But like the author ID on line 42 doesn't have anything to do with the author ID on 51.
on
Because the
fifth.
one on 51 is depending on which delete button you have clicked.
Ah, okay. So you mean that instead of getting the delete over here from the template, we could basically
No,
take
no,
it from.
I want to know on the on success function on where we can have access to the idea because right now you're ticking the wrong one,
Right,
right?
right. So I would need to remind myself what are the things that we get here. So that is data variables and context. So let me just quickly take a look at this. Data variables and context. And I think the quickest way would be to run a debugger and
Mm.
actually to see what they are. Like sometimes you just cannot remember
Yeah, no
all those
worries.
things.
No
So
worries.
yeah, so we will just take a look at the yep, what we've got here. Delete over here and let's take a look. So so what we've got here in this debugger statement is that data is an object that has nothing interesting. Variables is the one. So basically variables. So yep, it seems that would be it. Uh
Can we have multiple
ID.
variables?
ID. Local variables. No, the thing is, like in our case, in most scenarios, depending on the value of the signal, would be like usually like unless you have any kind of race condition, that would work. Though the thing is, within the mutation, like the data that you get here is actually the result of the delete itself,
Mm.
and this is empty. And context is something I cannot recall what that is, but basically you want to know what were the variables passed to the mutation function itself. And this is actually our, this is the value of the signal. But in case you started the mutation function and during the time the mutation takes place, you could have changed that. I think you asked about such scenario already. So this is the historical ID that you have started the mutation with,
Yeah,
so
makes
that
sense.
there is no way to diverge and to have any problematic race conditions in this case. So again, if we walk into the network tab and we clear that stuff, and we would yeah, delete the first element. Oh, we've got the debugger still here anyway, so I'll just let it go and move to the network tab again, delete, so that yeah, we're invalidating the one, and for this reason it gets like the request gets re-executed, and the list also is revalidated, so it also needs to get re-executed, and this one is actually the delete one. So it has been executed, and yeah, again, just because of this API,
Does it
Leanne Graham is still visible.
does it make sense to reload an item that we have just deleted? Because
It doesn't make sense to reload the item that has just deleted, but
to
actually,
remove it, right?
what we should do here, like, okay, so it depends what would be the logic of our how to say it view. So when we delete something, we should consider that this data is already removed. So when we delete stuff, we should immediately kind of like set it to something, right? Because if you have the, like, you're displaying, let's say, author ID 3, and when you delete it, you should consider that it's not there already, right? Or like you cannot use it already. So we should also update the signal value. And now, if the signal value would be, let's say, undefined, of course, we need to make sure that
I
the
wasn't really
undefined,
I wasn't really
yeah,
referring to that. I meant like we are deleting Chelsea, for instance, which is probably ID 5 or
yep,
4.
Whatever.
So we want to reload like the authors, but we don't want to reload Chelsea because we removed it. We probably just want to remove Chelsea from our query
Yeah.
manager.
Yeah. You've got API for that. You've got API for that. Well, let me just quickly check what is the name. For this. So in Angular query. So all in all, you do have the query cache entry for the list. And now, and item number 5 has been removed. So what you can do is basically get into the cache entry of this one and update it manually just by removing ID 5. This is, I guess, what you mean. And I
I
need
thought
to
we
remind
could just like we invalidate queries, but sometimes we just want to remove them,
update.
right?
Yeah, remove, but also update. Updates from mutation responses.
So you have a remove
Uh,
queries function there.
Set query data. That's basically it. So after your mutation is correct, you might, for instance, want to set some query data, either arbitrarily, what the thing is. For instance, you add a new element to your list so that you don't need to, reload it from the server because you have
No, no,
just
no.
added it. Yeah,
That's still not what I mean. So I
yeah,
understand that we reload all the data, but we still have a query in there with Chelsea, right? Even though we removed it. We clicked the
yeah.
delete button on Chelsea, so we
You
probably
mean
want to
okay,
remove the
okay.
query as well.
Right, right. Yeah. Now I understand it. So let me just quickly get back to the setup. Right. So yeah, now I get what you mean. Yeah, there should be. So whenever we're doing it, that should be not invalidate queries, but that should be this dot query client remove queries.
Yeah, exactly. That makes
That's
sense.
that's that's it. That's it. But yeah, so sorry, I misunderstood your question.
No
But
worries.
anyway, we could basically remove that one. And actually,
Mhm.
yeah, it makes way more sense than invalidating it. But actually, we could also, instead of invalidating the query, we could also update the list query, which is this dot the one set query data or set queries data. And using this one, we could basically, yeah, so that would be authors list, and for previous authors, filter, blah, 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 blah. So yeah, we have removed what was we know what was the ID. We know what was the previous value of this certain. Oh, by the way, we don't want the queries list this way. We want to use our query factory. So here that would be the list of all, not all authors. That would be authors list. Oh, you know what I mean.
Mhm.
Yeah, so here, in this case, we would not even have to run the query entirely. As you can see, this is removed locally from this one as well. So
Mm.
delete, 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 etc. So this is what would happen. Yeah. Um, Yeah, so one more thing that we could like show here for our listeners is that, for instance, when we have the authors list, like you have a whole range of things that we would like to potentially use within our query. So we've got the refetch, invalidate, reset, etc., trigger loading, trigger errors. These are very useful when you want to check without messing up with your API or with network throttling or with the block network requests. So for instance, if you want to check what would happen over here, sometimes you want to trigger an error by blocking request URL, etc. So this is kind of neat and useful, but if you want to check how does your view use the query even faster, you can check whether the loading, the error, the fetching, etc., whether all these work correctly by just triggering. For instance, we can, I'll just reload it. We can just trigger that we are loading the one. So as you can see, we are in the process of loading the thing, and now we can restore loading. Or we can trigger the error. So there is an error going on here, and restore the error. And since for the list, I have triggered the error, and for some reason there is something wrong that I did here, that it's not displayed. Probably I should take a look at is error. Probably this should be the one. So I messed something up, and I can quickly check that. Yeah, so it seems that there is still something not handled correctly. But yeah, I don't know this API by heart. Still, yeah, that's more or less it. And by the way, you can take a look at all these, query options and settings and configuration. Yeah, so that would be pretty much it. So, what's your impression, Brett?
I love it. I love it. It's simple. It's very opinionated. There is one thing I'm still struggling with, and that is that, like, the functionality that we've just written, like deleting stuff, and then when you delete stuff, you still have to invalidate and update other stuff. Like, this isn't a component, and maybe that's something that's redundant that we want to reuse somewhere else. So how would you tackle that? Like, would you extract that in a service, or you really feel like you need to keep it within the component there? Because yeah, let's say that you have different parts in your application where you need to redo that. For me, it kind of makes sense that when we delete an author, like wherever in the application, that the updating of the correct query keys should be done in a similar way.
Yeah, it's a perfect question. And like all the things that I've done so far was kind of building blocks and how do they relate to each other. So that was less around architecture, but that's really a very good question. So I would say that the query is something that is very, very near to the service that handles loading the external data. So I would say that there should be something like author queries.ts. And now, whether you prefer classes and injectables via dependency injection, that's good. Whether you prefer function-based injection, that's still good. Like, you have currently in Angular, you have two possible approaches. But yeah, definitely the component should not be responsible for this thing. So I'm going to just do a function because this is just going to be quicker and simpler. But if you prefer to provide a service, go on with that. Just keep one thing in mind is that when you have inject query, you've got all this, like Angular tracking whether this is active or not. For instance, if you destroy the component, then inject query relies on the destroy ref. And if the inject query gets destroyed via destroy ref, then Angular query, this is the way that it tracks the number of active components, right? And if you put inject query into a service and the service is provided in root, then it will not be the component, right? But it will be the service who will basically become the consumer. So this is one thing that you need to watch out for. But still,
if we navigate away from author listing, that means that author query and authors would be removed from the query client when it's destroyed or not.
No, you have a well, you would the query key entry would remain, but the active consumer would get removed. And now it is the responsibility of query client to basically measure the time unless the GC time passes, so that the query key entry can get entirely removed.
Yeah. Okay.
But the query itself, yeah. So
cool.
What we've got here is inject query of authors. So we could basically make it inject authors query, because that's basically what it is. And what we do here is we're just returning this thing. So return inject query. Now we need to deal with all those missing imports for this. So just to make it faster, I'm going to do it in one shot. So what we are still missing over here is that we would need to know what is the author ID. So the author ID would basically become author ID. That would be author ID. So that would be author ID. And we don't have the this author service. So we would need to, using, again, the inject API, we would basically get the author service this way. So const inject. Oh, yeah, I'm sorry for the typos. Inject over here. And yep, that's basically it. Is of type unknown because this is not the right path, and this is the right path already, and we need to export the thing from here. Like potentially there is some things that we're not using anymore. Inject mutation, inject query client could be needed for us in just a while. So this is inject author's query, and here we could basically put inject author query. And if I didn't mess anything up, no, that is the author ID key.
I think you made a mistake there because right now when you pass the author ID, like the signal, you will have to read the signal, but it will not keep track because it's not in a callback
Yeah,
function.
yeah. But the question is, like, why did I put the author ID here at all? Because it's not the all authors. Shit, it is the single author. So I copied not the right thing. Sorry, I
No
copied the
worries.
wrong thing.
I think you have to. I think you have to pass the signal instead of the author ID.
Yeah, absolutely. But in this case, I should not pass anything because I just copied the wrong thing. But you're right. You're absolutely right to make it reactive. Yeah. So when we do the inject all authors, or we could even do inject authors list query. So this would be the one, and let's put it inject author list query. Yeah. So here we don't need any signal ID whatsoever. And that's basically the thing. So we're using Angular injection
Mm-hmm.
anyway. So I would put all the queries like related to this service over here or to this RESTful
Yep.
resource. By the way, I consider that the query keys also make more sense to actually live here instead of the other file. So we could also remove it from here. I just don't want to, go through all the refactors. And for both the mutation and the author, like author detail query, that's probably how it should be named. Then
Mm-hmm.
let's now carry on with the signal requiring one export. Export function inject author details query. Now this is the one that might require the signal. So yeah, this is the author ID. So that would be an author ID, which is a signal
Yeah,
of
exactly.
number. Yeah,
Yeah, that looks
author
clean.
ID. And yeah, if we need to inject the thing, then we can inject the thing. Basically, this injection is just looking up the provider within the injector, and that's basically it. So the fact that we are kind of, injecting the stuff in multiple functions is not a big deal. Like the biggest deal is that we have one more line, but actually injecting the thing is just looking up and returning, like
Mhm.
getting something out from the cache. So I don't consider that this is anyhow problematic. So inject author details query, and let's put it over here, and let's just put the this.author ID, and probably we need to import that one as well. So yeah,
Clean.
yeah, and just to carry on with this mutation. So that would be export function delete author mutation. And what is nice that we haven't said is not only that our component gets drastically simplified, like as you can see over here. By the way, we will be able to remove the query client entirely in just a while, right? Um, but also the fact that you can use those injections in multiple places within your application whatsoever. So it's not only making components smaller and simpler and kind of, more
Yeah, you
narrow.
tackle the redundancy part, right?
Exactly. So, and moreover, you have like you have a place that should be actually responsible for doing the queries. So author ID, that would be author service. So now we need to get the author service injected again. So this is what we've got over here. Now we need the query client. So this is how we get rid of the query client from this part entirely. By the way, at this point, we can basically remove the Angular query import itself because we don't need it. We will also be able to remove the author service entirely in just the next step so that the only thing that our component depends on is the query itself. So
Yeah, it's
again,
really
uh,
functional as well.
yeah. So what is the again, what is the reason that I prefer to inject the things explicitly in all of these inject functions? Is that the inject authors list query depends only on one provider. This one depends only on one provider, but this one depends on two providers. So, in order not to share it, basically inject whatever you need, but not more. I think it's like, easier to maintain, to extend. If you, after many months, had lots of these, you could basically break them up into bigger, more files. And this way, they're always independent on each other. I would consider it like in the long run, simpler and like more functional to go with. So yeah, this seems that it works because, oh, sorry, it works. We don't have to pass any signal because this would be the one that actually invokes the mutation that is going to pass
Mm,
the data. So we
yeah.
don't need to pass the signal here anyway. And here we would basically put the delete author, sorry, inject delete author mutation just to be aligned with the convention. Inject delete author mutation. Cannot find name author mutation because you lost the import. We don't need to have kind of any of those. Yeah, so this way you basically have, and we don't need the author service anyway, because why would we need the author service at all? So the only thing is that our author should actually be moved, like the entity that should be moved to a model or DTO file, like be removed from here anyway. And that's basically all you need. Author query, author's query, delete author mutation. And like, as you can see, this is pretty straightforward. Like you could say, oh, there is a lot of things going on here. Well, maybe. But on the other hand,
Ah,
you've got all the
I don't.
data sharing, refreshing, refetching, invalidating, and so on and so forth. And you still have all the power of RxJS if you need it.
Yeah, it's really nice, and I think I don't think there's any boilerplate at all, to be honest. Like I've been in a lot of code bases when they use like NGRX and they put like all the success state, loading states, error states inside of the
Actions,
store. Yeah, you
reducers,
have actions,
yes.
action times, you have reducers, effects, all that kind of stuff. And like this is very functional. I think for a React developer, it's also pretty straightforward to work and code like this. So it's like this uniform thing. And I'm a huge fan of like the single responsibility principle. And like you have the data fetching, then you have the query logic, you have your component logic, and it's like it's all separated. It's very clean.
Yeah, like I think the perfect match with like Angular query is very, very good in managing the server data, but it has, which is important to emphasize, it has nothing to do with client data, as you can see, for instance, here. So Angular query is not a client state solution.
No.
So I would still go with a store for your local state. So in my opinion, the best match actually would be to get the Angular query one for server state management and to get the NGRX signal store for local state management, because NGRX signal store allows you to compose your local state, but it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the external state. And if you combine the two, like, this is going to be absolutely brilliant, because what you get here from the query is going to be a signal anyway. So actually, this is not a writable signal. This is a read-only signal, right? So like a computed. And what you deal with in NGRX Signal Store is actually a computed, like in many scenarios. So I would
Yeah.
say the perfect match would actually be if we just take a look at NGRX Signal Store. That would be to make a combination. Let's just look at one of the examples. By the way, maybe we've got some example with an inject over here, because all the things that we've got in NGRX Signal Store are created within the injection context. Oh, as we can see here, we've got the bookstore example signal store. So we start with providing what is the state. So this has nothing to do with Angular query at all. You might have your local state computed, and in both with computed or with method, etc., you can always pass something that is injected. So what do you inject here? The query. And here you go. So all that I would do is basically, for instance, inject author list. That would be inject, like, just the function that I have just defined, and put it into the computed. So what you get here is you got your local definition of what are the filters, sorting, pagination via signals, and the external data that come from Angular query. And I would
Mm.
say this is the perfect match, because NGRX Signal Store works perfectly with your local state, Angular query works perfectly with your external state, and you get the best of both worlds.
I don't even think it should be NGRX signal store necessarily. It's a good option, but like it would also work with the one from push based like RX Angler and or even
Sure.
even just like local signals. Like it's a completely different problem that query solves, and I really like that.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. Like, what I wanted to emphasize is that it's not either or.
yeah.
Angular query makes a perfect match to whatever you want to do with your local state, whatever you want to use for your local state. It just perfectly fits the external data management. I'm pretty sure RX Angular also provides a way to basically inject whatever you want outside of RX Angular and basically do
Mhm.
the very same thing. So that would be a, yeah, very very cool way, because you can easily like get to your code and remove all the code that you need for like you can get rid of your code where you need to share the data across the whole application, make sure that you refresh it and you reload it, etc., etc., etc. So you get all these things for free.
Cool.
Cool. So yeah, whether you prefer NGRX Signal Store or RX Angular or just bare signals, like, this would be at least, I think, a cool thing to look at. Okay,
Definitely.
so dear everybody, if you have any questions, just write down in the comments. Brecht, thank you very much for being part of this meeting, and I hope we'll do some more Angular query and other stuff in the other days soon.
Awesome. All
Okay,
right.
so see you everybody around. Thank you and goodbye.
Cheers.